The coach didn't even look up from his clipboard when he said it. Girls like you don't belong on this track. Go home and learn to cook. 31 months later, Nadine Okafor stood on the top step of the Olympic podium in Paris. Gold medal pressed against her chest, the French national stadium roaring so loud she couldn't hear herself cry. But that's not where this story starts. This story starts in a laundromat in Cincinnati, Ohio, on a Tuesday night in February, when the heat had been off for 3 days and Nadine was sitting on top of a dryer, not because she was waiting for her clothes, but because the dryer was the warmest thing in the apartment building, and her mother had told her to stay there until the landlord fixed the furnace, or she fell asleep, whichever came first. She was 12 years old, and she had her mother's old track shoes on her feet, 2 sizes too big, stuffed with newspaper at the toes. They were the only shoes she owned that didn't let the cold in through the sole. Her mother, Gloria Okafor, worked double shifts at the hospital kitchen 5 days a week, and single shifts on the weekends. She was a woman who woke at 4 in the morning and didn't sit down until 10 at night, and even then, she was only sitting down to check Nadine's homework before she fell asleep with a pen still in her hand. Gloria had a laugh that came from somewhere deep in her chest, the kind of laugh that made strangers at the grocery store smile without knowing why. She'd been a runner once, too. Back in Nigeria, before the immigration papers and the application fees, and the job that paid just enough to keep the lights on, she still had her old photo on the dresser. 22 years old, mid-stride, head thrown back, looking like she owned the entire track. Nadine used to stare at that photo when she couldn't sleep. She started running at 13 on her own, before school, because the shoes were finally her size, and because there was a park 3 blocks from their apartment where nobody bothered her before 6 in the morning. She didn't know she was fast at first. She thought everybody's lungs burned like that, thought everybody counted their steps the way she did, thought everybody felt that specific feeling, like the ground was too slow for them. A neighbor, a retired gym teacher named Mr. Elias Brandt, saw her running one morning and told her she needed to be on the school team. She told him she didn't have the registration fee. He paid it himself and never mentioned it again. She made varsity as a freshman. By sophomore year, she was running times that made the athletic director at Jefferson High, a man named Coach Dale Pritchett, actually put down his coffee and looked twice at the stopwatch. Coach Pritchett was the kind of man who wore the same Navy windbreaker every single day and who had opinions about everything, about footwear, about diet, about which side of the track you warmed up on. And he delivered all of these opinions in the same flat, bored tone, the way other people read the weather forecast. He had a long list of athletes he'd developed over the years, and he was proud of that list, and he was very particular about who got added to it. Nadine was not on his list. She was fast. He could see that, but in his 22 years of coaching, Coach Pritchett had developed a theory about which athletes were worth his time, and his theory had a lot to do with posture and build and what he called coachability, which was a word that seemed to mean something very specific when he said it and very little when he tried to explain it. He had a roster of boys he drove to invitationals himself. He had a junior sprinter named Tyler Bouchard that he was grooming for a Division I scholarship. He had plans, and his plans did not include a girl from Clifton who ran in park shoes and showed up to practice without the proper warm-up gear. The first time Nadine asked him to time her formally, to put her on the roster, to let her train with the group, he was standing at the far end of the track with his clipboard, not looking at her, and he said, "I've got a full squad. You can run on your own time." She came back the next week. "Coach Pritchett, if you just time me once, I've seen your times from the meet. You're not consistent." "I can be consistent if I have structured training." He looked up then. Not at her face, at her shoes, her secondhand shorts, her mother's old track jacket with the frayed cuffs. And then he said it. "Girls like you don't belong on this track. Go home and learn to cook." He said it quietly, like it wasn't even worth raising his voice for. like she was a question he'd already answered. Then he turned back to his clipboard and called Tyler Bouchard over to discuss his start position. Nadine stood there for 3 seconds. She counted. 1, 2, 3. Then she walked off the track. She didn't cry until she got to the girls' bathroom. And she didn't tell anyone, not even her mother, especially not her mother, who had enough to carry without adding this. What she did instead was go back to Mr. Brandt. Elias Brandt was 71 years old and moved with the careful deliberateness of a man who had replaced one hip and was being very careful about the other. He had a folding chair that he brought to the park every morning, and a stopwatch that he claimed had been used at a collegiate meet in 1987, and an absolute encyclopedic knowledge of sprint mechanics that he was happy to share with anyone who would listen. He'd coached at the high school level for 30 years before his retirement, and he had the kind of calm certainty that came from having seen 1,000 athletes and knowing, in your bones, what you were looking at. He looked at Nadine running, and he said, "You have a gift. What you don't have is technique, yet." He started coaching her in the park. At 5:30 in the morning, 3 days a week, he taught her to drive through her blocks. He taught her to stay in her lane through the first 40 meters, even when every instinct told her to look left. He taught her about arm mechanics, about breathing, about the specific mental discipline of the 100 meters, which he described as 10 seconds of complete and total commitment. No second thoughts allowed. Gloria noticed. She noticed the early mornings, the way Nadine came home, exhausted and focused, the way she started eating differently, started sleeping better, started keeping a notebook with splits written in it. She didn't ask too many questions at first, but one morning she watched from the kitchen window as Nadine laced up and headed for the door at 5:15, and she said quietly, "You're serious about this?" Nadine turned around. "Yes, ma'am." Gloria looked at her for a long moment. She thought about her own photo on the dresser. She thought about the immigration forms and the job at the hospital kitchen, and the way certain dreams get folded up and put in a drawer because there's no time, no money, no room. And then she thought about the way her daughter ran, the way she'd always run, like the ground couldn't hold her. "Okay," Gloria said, "then be serious." That was the last time either of them needed to talk about it. By junior year, Nadine was running times that attracted attention outside Jefferson High. A regional qualifier, a state invitational, a clip that someone posted online that got shared into a track and field forum, where people who knew things about sprint mechanics started leaving comments with words like natural stride efficiency and exceptional hip rotation for her age. Coach Pritchett saw the clip. He did not say anything. What he did was, at the next team meeting, announce a new policy about unofficial training activities on school property, which didn't technically apply to Nadine, who trained in the park, but which felt like something. Nadine did not care. She had stopped caring about Coach Pritchett the morning she decided that his opinion of her was data, not verdict. The state championship that spring was held in Columbus. Nadine qualified as an independent, which meant she paid her own entry fee, which meant Gloria worked an extra shift, and Mr. Brandt quietly slipped an envelope into her hand and looked away before she could read what was in it. She finished second in her heat, third in the semi, and then in the final, something happened that she would describe later, much later, in interviews, in documentaries, in a memoir that wouldn't come until she was 30, as "the moment I understood what I was." The gun went off. She drove through her blocks. She was in lane 4, and she could feel lane 3 to her left and lane 5 to her right. And she stopped thinking about either of them. Stopped thinking about anything except the mechanics, the drive, the arms, the stride. And for 10 seconds the entire world narrowed down to the distance between her and the finish line. And then she crossed it. First place. 11.24 seconds. She didn't scream. She didn't throw her arms up. She stood at the end of the track, chest heaving, and looked back at where she'd started, and she thought, okay, the state title made things move faster. A woman named Coach Andrea Weston from the Cincinnati track club called Mr. Brandt. He'd given her his number, quietly, before the state meet, and asked about Nadine. Coach Weston was 43 years old, had competed at the collegiate level, had coached 3 athletes to national junior championships, and had the specific quality of paying attention that good coaches have. The kind where you feel like you are the only person in the room. She met Nadine at the park on a Wednesday morning and watched her run for exactly 20 minutes without saying anything. Then she said, "Your block start is something we can improve. Everything else is already there." Nadine said yes. Then she asked, because she had to ask, "How much does it cost?" Coach Weston looked at her. "Let's talk about that after you make nationals." She made nationals 8 months later. The months between that conversation and the national junior championships were the hardest and most clarifying of Nadine's life. Coach Weston trained her 4 mornings a week, and once on Saturdays. She overhauled Nadine's block start completely. She introduced weight training, nutrition discipline, recovery protocol. She explained every decision, every adjustment, every drill, not because she thought Nadine needed to understand to comply, but because she believed an athlete who understood the why ran with more intelligence. Nadine was 17 years old, getting up at 4:30 in the morning, going to school, working a part-time job at a coffee shop, 3 evenings a week to help with household expenses, and training with the kind of focus that made other athletes at the track club notice her and then stop making eye contact, because there is something slightly uncomfortable about being near a person who wants something that badly. Gloria came to the National Junior Championships in Atlanta. She sat in the stands in her hospital kitchen uniform because she'd come directly from a shift and she had Nadine's old photo from the dresser house folded in her jacket pocket because she'd put it there that morning without quite knowing why. She watched her daughter walk to the blocks in lane 5 and she pressed both hands against her mouth, and she didn't move for 10 seconds. Nadine won 11.9. A personal best by 15/100ths of a second, which is enormous in a sport measured in fractions. Gloria cried so hard that a woman sitting next to her put an arm around her shoulders and didn't let go for 5 minutes. In the chaos after the race, when Nadine finally found her mother in the crowd, Gloria pulled her close and held on and said into her hair, "I see you. I see you running. I always saw it." Nadine pressed her face against her mother's shoulder and let herself be 12 years old again, just for a minute, sitting on a dryer in a cold laundromat, wearing shoes 2 sizes too big. Then she straightened up because there was more to do. College came, a full scholarship to the University of Tennessee, which Coach Weston had helped facilitate, and which meant Nadine arrived on campus in September with a single duffel bag. Feelings as someone, and who had earned everything feeling, and is still slightly afraid someone might ask her to flick her. Nobody asked her to leave. Her collegiate coach, Coach Marcus Tillman, a measured, methodical man who had coached 2 Olympians and spoke in short sentences and long silences, evaluated her in the first week and told her that with the right development, she could be competitive at the national senior level within 2 years. She was competitive at the national senior level within 18 months. The year she turned 22, she ran 10:89 at the U.S. Track and Field Championships. It wasn't a record. It wasn't even the fastest time in the field that day, but it earned her a spot in the top 8, which meant she was in the mix, which meant that people who made decisions about international competition were now aware that Nadine Okafor existed. She turned 23. She ran 10:81. She made the national team for the first time. She got on a plane for the first time and flew to Zurich for a Diamond League meet, and she stood in the call room before her race and looked around at the other women. Women who had been on this circuit for years. Women whose names she had been reading since she was 15, and she felt something that wasn't fear exactly. It was more like recognition, like, these are the people I'm supposed to be running against. Okay, she finished 4th. She called Gloria from the hotel room at midnight, Cincinnati time, and Gloria picked up on the second ring because she had not slept. "Fourth," Nadine said. "Fourth in the world," Gloria said. "Not the world, just fourth in the world," Gloria said again firmly, and that was the end of that. There was a setback. There is always a setback. At 24, 6 months before the Olympic year, Nadine pulled her left hamstring in training. Not a tear. A grade 2 strain, which sounds less serious than it is and is in fact serious enough to cost her 8 weeks of full training in a year when every week mattered. She did her physical therapy with the same focused discipline she applied to everything, but she lay awake at night, doing math she didn't want to do, calculating what 8 weeks meant, whether she could still qualify, whether the timing had taken something from her that she couldn't get back. Coach Tillman sat with her 2 weeks into her recovery and said, "You're going to want to come back too fast. I know. Don't. We have time." She made herself believe him. She came back carefully. She rebuilt slowly. She watched her splits improve week over week and tried not to think about the women who had been training without interruption while she was in a rehab pool. She tried not to think about the Olympic trials, which were 8 weeks out, then 6, then 4. At the trials, she ran the 3rd fastest qualifying time and made the Olympic team. The night after the trials, she called Mr. Elias Brandt. He was 73 now, and the second hip had given him more trouble than the first, and he attended meets from home these days. Watching on his laptop in his kitchen, she told him she'd made it. He was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "I know, I watched. Your drive phase is the best it's ever been." She laughed. Of course, his first comment was technical. Of course it was. "Thank you," she said. "For the park, for the stopwatch. Thank you for showing up," he said. Not everyone does. The Olympics were in Paris. Nadine had never been to Paris. She arrived 3 days before competition began and spent the first evening sitting on the edge of her bed in the athletes' village, looking at the wall. Because there are moments when the size of what you're doing lands on you all at once, and the only appropriate response is to be very still for a few minutes. Then she put on her shoes and went for a walk. The Stade de France was enormous. She'd seen it in pictures, in broadcasts, in videos she'd studied for months, but being inside it was something different. She stood on the track during the team's familiarization session and looked up at the stands, empty now, and tried to imagine what they would sound like full. Tried to imagine the starter's gun. Tried to imagine her blocks at the line. She had learned, over the years, a very specific mental discipline. You cannot run the race in your head too many times before you run it in your body. Because the race in your head is always slightly wrong, and if you've rehearsed the wrong version too many times, it gets in the way. What you can do is rehearse the feeling, the start, the drive, the commitment to your lane, the absence of second thoughts. The complete and total 10 seconds that Mr. Brandt had described in a park in Cincinnati when she was 13. She walked her lane, all 100 meters of it, and she thought, okay, the heats were clean. She ran within herself, conserved what she needed to conserve, hit 10:87, advanced comfortably. The semifinals the next morning were harder. The field had narrowed, and the woman, in lane 2, a Jamaican sprinter named Amara Reed, who held the current world record, was running with the specific effortless terror of someone who was about to peak at exactly the right moment. Nadine finished second in her semi, which was exactly what she needed. The night before the final, she called Gloria. "Are you there yet?" Nadine asked. "I'm there," Gloria said. "I'm looking at the stadium from the outside. It's very big." Nadine laughed. "Don't stay up too late." "I'm going to stay up as late as I want," Gloria said. "I'll sleep when I'm home." "I love you, Mom. I love you. Run like the ground can't hold you." It was what she'd always said. Nadine had never told her mother that that was the exact feeling she'd been chasing since she was 13. She told her now. Gloria was quiet for a moment. Then, "I know. I've always known. Now get some sleep." The morning of the final was gray and cool, which was good. Nadine ran well in cool weather. She ate her usual breakfast at the usual time, went through her usual warm-up sequence, listened to nothing on her headphones because some people needed music and she needed silence. She checked her spikes. She checked them again. In the call room, 8 women sat in 8 chairs, and the specific quiet of the call room, that held breath, before the dropped stillness, settled over all of them. Amara Reed sat 2 seats down. She had her eyes closed. She looked like someone who was already somewhere else. Nadine looked at her hands. She thought about the laundromat, the dryer, the shoes stuffed with newspaper. She thought about the clipboard and the windbreaker, and the flat, bored voice. Girls like you don't belong on this track. Go home and learn to cook. She didn't feel angry. That was the thing. People expected her to feel angry, to carry that moment like a wound, to run against it, to prove something. But she had stopped running against anything a long time ago. She ran toward things now, toward the finish line, toward the person she was still becoming, toward the feeling her mother had described without knowing it. Like the ground can't hold you. The callroom attendant opened the door. Nadine stood up. The walk from the call room to the track is a specific geography that every sprinter remembers. The tunnel, the sound of the crowd growing as you get closer to the light, the way the noise hits you when you emerge into the stadium, physical. Like stepping into a different kind of air. 50,000 people in the stands. The flags. The screens. The track, red and perfect, laid out in front of her like a sentence she'd been waiting to finish. She found her blocks. She set her feet. She looked at the track directly in front of her, not at the finish line, not at the other lanes, just the 2 meters immediately ahead. And she breathed. The starter spoke in French and then English. The commands came. She settled into the system, and in that moment just before the gun, there was a stillness that she had been chasing her whole life. Not silence. The crowd was a roar, constant and total, but something inside the noise. A center. A still point. Like the morning air in the park at 5:30 when it was just her, and the track and the sound of her own breathing, and the entire world reduced to a single, simple fact. She was here. She had made it here. Everything else was just the race. The gun fired. She drove through the blocks. She kept her drive phase low. She hit the transition at 20 meters and let her body open up. Let the stride lengthen. Let everything she had built over 12 years of 5 a.m. mornings, and second-hand shoes, and cold laundromats, and a retired gym teacher's folding chair. Let all of it come through now. Come through in the mechanics, and the rhythm, and the commitment to every single one of the next 70 meters. And she ran. She ran like the ground couldn't hold her. She crossed the line in 10.76 seconds. She stood at the end of the track, and the noise came down on her like a wave, and she opened her mouth, and no sound came out, because there was no sound big enough. She looked up at the scoreboard. Her name at the top. The time. The flag. She pressed both hands over her face. There is a photograph from that moment. She saw it later, in the weeks after. Everywhere. Of Nadine standing at the finish line in the Stade de France, with her hands pressed over her face and her number still bright against her chest. And the stands behind her a blur of color and motion. It is the image that most people know. The one that gets shared. What most people don't notice, because you have to look closely, is that she is not covering her face in disbelief. She is smiling. She'd known, somewhere, since the park at 5:30 in the morning at 13 years old. She'd known the way you know something before you have words for it. The knowing and the arriving are 2 different things, and the distance between them is everything you have to do in between, and she had done all of it. And now she was here. In the stands, Gloria Okafor was on her feet, both hands pressed over her mouth, and she was crying so hard she couldn't see the scoreboard. She didn't need to. She'd seen her daughter cross the line. She'd seen the time. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out the old photo. 22 years old, mid-stride, head thrown back, and she held it against her chest for a moment, and then she put it back. Some things you carry, and then you can put them down. In a high school in Cincinnati, a man in a Navy windbreaker, was watching the Olympic final on a laptop in the coach's office. When Nadine crossed the line, he was quiet for a long time. He looked at the screen. He looked at the name on the scoreboard. He did not say anything. There is nothing to say when you told someone who would be great that they didn't belong. There is nothing to say that isn't already said by the scoreboard and the gold and the 5:30 a.m. mornings you never knew about. On the podium, Nadine stood at the top step while the American national anthem played. She held the gold medal in both hands for a moment and looked down at it. This small, heavy, impossible thing that was also just a thing, just an object, just the symbol of something that had already happened and couldn't be taken back. Mr. Brandt watched from his kitchen in Cincinnati, laptop on the table, folding chair empty beside him. When the anthem ended, he closed the laptop, sat for a minute, and then went to make tea. He had already said everything he needed to say. Years ago, in a park, to a 13-year-old girl in shoes stuffed with newspaper. You have a gift, she had it still. Some coaches see you, and some coaches don't. Some people will look at where you come from and decide that's where you're going. They will say it in flat, bored voices, like the verdict has already been read. But there are others, the ones with folding chairs and old stopwatches, the ones who show up at 5:30 in the morning, the ones who slip envelopes into your hand and look away before you can read what's in them. And those are the ones who matter. And then there's you. There's always you. The one who shows up anyway. The one who runs before the world is watching. Who earns the calluses before the medals, who carries the belief before there's any evidence to justify it. That's the part no coach can give you. That part was Nadine's from the beginning. It was always hers.